What would you do if you lost everything in a storm, and your only option was a public shelter? In today's video, we're going to dive into a story of resilience and hope that begins on a devastating night. A grandfather and his granddaughter lose their entire home in a brutal storm. With no other choice, they face the reality of living in a shelter, where fear and shame follow them daily. But in the midst of despair, something unexpected happens, and this encounter has the power to change their lives. Stay with us until the end to find out how this meeting transforms everything and how a fresh start can come from the most unlikely places.
The sound of thunder exploded through the room like a wave, shaking the windows of August's small house in New York. He quickly glanced at his granddaughter Lily, who was clutching a blanket to her face, her fear as clear as the sky outside, which had transformed into a black sea of heavy clouds. At 72, August had weathered many storms in his life, but he had never felt such a strange premonition as he did that night. He sat beside Lily on the sofa, trying to hide his own nervousness. His hands were beginning to sweat, and he felt the weight of age pressing down on his shoulders. But Lily needed him. "It'll pass soon, sweetheart," he murmured, trying to sound more confident than he truly felt. "You don't need to worry." Yet, as he spoke, his gaze was drawn to a crack in the ceiling that he had never noticed before. It was small, but the dark edges indicated that this fissure was not new. He swallowed hard, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest. The storm, which already seemed threatening enough, suddenly took on an even heavier weight. Another thunderclap tore through the air, and the entire house shook as if it were made of paper. Lily flinched, and Auguste pulled her closer, holding her tightly. He could feel her little heart racing against his arm. From the ceiling, small particles of dust began to fall. It was a subtle warning, but Auguste knew that this small sign could be the difference between safety and disaster. "Stay with me, Lily, I'm here. Everything will be okay," he repeated, more to himself than to her. Time seemed to freeze as Auguste tried to comprehend what was happening. The crack in the ceiling widened slowly but relentlessly, and he could only watch, frozen, as it spread like a web above their heads. The storm outside seemed to concentrate all its weight on the little roof, and Auguste felt like he was racing against the clock. In an instant, there was a sharp crack like wood breaking in half. Auguste grabbed Lily, pulling her beneath him with all the speed his aging joints could muster, and then everything came crashing down. The sound was deafening. Tiles and beams collapsed, and a cloud of dust enveloped them immediately. The floor vibrated with the impact as if an earthquake had unfolded right there in their small living room. Auguste pressed Lily against him, his face buried in her hair, trying to shield her from any harm. His body reacted instinctively as he fought to calm his mind and understand what was happening. He felt the dust fill his lungs and coughed, struggling but refused to move. Only when everything fell into a heavy, suffocating silence did Auguste finally dare to open his eyes. The room was now a heap of rubble, pieces of tile and beams scattered everywhere, but he felt no pain. Lily, beneath his arm, also seemed fine, shaking but safe. Slowly he eased away from her, still trembling and coughing. "Are you okay, Lily?" he whispered, trying not to show how shaken he was. She nodded, rubbing her dust-covered face with her hand. Still trembling, she leaned her head against his shoulder, seeking the silent comfort of her grandfather, who, despite looking visibly frightened, wore a determined expression. Gradually, the dust in the air began to settle, revealing the devastation around them. Auguste looked at the partially destroyed ceiling, the walls still standing but fragile. His furniture was buried beneath debris and dirt. He tried to mentally calculate the damage, but his mind refused to process the loss. After all, this was the only home he had known for many years, and every corner of it told a part of his story. Losing it felt like losing a part of himself. But then he looked at Lily, still holding his arm. She gazed up at him with wide, trusting eyes, as if she knew he would find a solution. In that moment, Auguste realized that it no longer mattered how he felt. What mattered was what he needed to do for her. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility press on his chest like an invisible hand. The decision formed in his mind, bitter but inevitable. They could not stay there. The house was no longer a safe shelter for them. He stood up, feeling tired and sore, yet determined. "Lily, we need to get out of here," he said, his tone serious. "I'll find a place for us to spend the night." She looked at him with a mix of sadness and acceptance, as if she understood that this was not an easy decision for him. Auguste forced a smile, even though it was far from sincere. He crouched down, gripping Lily's hand firmly, trying to convey the security he himself did not feel. Slowly, they made their way to the door, dodging the pieces of the ceiling strewn across the floor. Each step felt heavier than the last, and Auguste felt as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. When they finally crossed the threshold, he took one last look at the house, swallowing hard as he saw the ceiling that had once sheltered them now in ruins. With a heavy heart and a mind full of uncertainties, Auguste took a deep breath. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but for Lily he would face any challenge. As they walked away, Auguste cast one final glance at what remained of his home, feeling pride swallowed by the need to protect his granddaughter. His next step would lead him to a place he never imagined needing to seek, a shelter. But in his heart, one lingering question echoed, what else would he have to sacrifice to ensure her safety? The walk to the shelter was silent, each step a bitter decision Auguste had to swallow for Lily. He barely recognized the city around him. New York appeared gloomy on that rainy dawn. They finally arrived at the shelter, a worn-down and poorly lit building that seemed even more desolate at that hour. Upon entering, they were greeted by a staff member who guided them to a common dormitory, explaining the rules of the place. Auguste observed everything with a tightening in his chest. He never imagined he would find himself there one day, needing help, depending on the charity of others. He looked around, seeing people with tired faces and wrinkled clothes that seemed as out of place as he felt. Despite his age, he felt small and exposed. He tried to maintain a firm expression so as not to worry Lily, but inside he knew nothing was okay. Lily, on the other hand, observed the new environment with contained curiosity, holding Auguste's hand tighter than usual. He felt her grip and forced a smile for her, as if to say everything was under control. But deep down, he knew that nothing was well. "Are you cold, sweetheart?" he asked, adjusting the jacket she wore, noticing the subtle tremor that crept up her shoulders. Lily nodded, but instead of complaining, she moved closer to Auguste, resting her head on his shoulder. The shelter, with its gray walls and musty smell, felt like a place that swallowed the hopes of anyone who entered. Auguste closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his 72 years, but he knew, somehow, he had to turn that place into a safe space for Lily, even if it was just for a short time. The night wore on as Auguste, exhausted, sat next to Lily on an improvised mattress they were given. Lily looked at him with a mix of curiosity and concern that seemed far too mature for a 9-year-old. She cupped Auguste's face with her small hands, and with a soft and almost mischievous smile whispered, "Grandpa, I'm here with you." Her words, so simple yet full of meaning, pierced Auguste's heart like a wave of relief and pain at the same time. He knew Lily was trying to be strong for him, perhaps in the same way he did for her. The maturity in her eyes moved him, yet it also made him feel incapable of providing the safety she deserved. "I know, sweetheart, and I'm here with you too," Auguste replied, stroking her face. "We're going to get through this together." They remained silent for a few moments, just breathing the same air and trying to adjust to the new environment. But then Auguste felt the eyes of others in the shelter resting on them. They were looks that mixed distrust and solidarity, a strange combination that seemed to fit perfectly in that environment. He glanced around and realized that most people carried their own burdens of sadness, their own stories that, like his, had brought them all to that same place. It was then that one of those gazes caught his attention. A woman, looking weary yet elegant, was staring intently at him and Lily. Her eyes were deep, and something in that expression made him feel understood, as if she knew exactly what he was going through. The woman approached slowly, sitting down on a nearby mattress. She nodded to Auguste, who returned the gesture with a polite expression, still unsure of who she was and what she intended. Unlike the others in the shelter, she seemed out of context there, with refined gestures and an haughty look, although it was clear she too was facing hardships. Auguste and Lily were almost dozing off when the woman approached once more. She introduced herself as Irina, briefly explaining that her life had taken an unexpected turn. She was a former fashion executive, with a solid career that had suddenly crumbled after a betrayal at work. "I had everything for many years," she said, keeping her gaze fixed on the floor. "But I discovered that trust comes with a high price, especially when it's broken." Auguste sensed the sadness that filled her words, and for a brief moment he saw a reflection of his own pain in Irina's eyes. The difference was that he had lost a physical home, but she had lost an entire life of stability and purpose. He didn't know the details, but that look said enough. "Life seems funny sometimes, doesn't it?" Auguste commented, trying to create a connection. "We never imagine where we'll end up." Irina gave a slight smile, nodding in agreement. "Not at all. I never thought I would need a shelter one day," she replied, her tone somewhat bitter. "But if we're here, maybe it's because we have something to learn, right?" Auguste nodded, feeling a pinch of hope that he himself had deemed unlikely just minutes earlier. Being there, listening to someone who had also lost so much, somehow made him feel less alone. Lily, asleep in his lap, seemed oblivious to the conversation, but Auguste knew that if she were awake, she would likely see something special in Irina too. Her presence seemed to shift the atmosphere, as if the dignity she radiated could somehow transform that place. Auguste looked around, noticing the other faces that also regarded her with respect and curiosity. He wondered what else there was to discover in those people whom fate had gathered under that same roof. As the night went on, Auguste felt that this meeting was more than a coincidence, and that perhaps Irina herself would play an important role in his path.
Before we continue with the emotional story of Auguste and Lily, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment. This really helps the channel grow and motivates me to bring more amazing stories to you. Now, let's dive into the next part of this journey.
The first days in the shelter passed slowly, yet they were intense for Auguste and Lily. The routine was repetitive and clumsy, and Auguste tried to adapt while keeping his dignity intact. Sometimes he found himself in one of the uncomfortable armchairs in the common room, observing the people around him with a curiosity he had never experienced before. Irina, on the other hand, maintained a more reserved demeanor. Despite the emotional distance she kept, it was clear that she was willing to talk to Auguste, perhaps for the first time in a long while. One afternoon, while Lily played with an improvised cloth doll, Irina sat down beside Auguste and began to speak, straightforwardly sharing how her life had changed so suddenly and brutally. She looked down as she recounted her career in the fashion industry, how she had risen to become a prominent executive, and the influence she had wielded in New York City. There was a mix of pride and bitter sadness in her voice. "I trusted the people around me," she said, finally raising her eyes to Auguste. "I made friendships, built alliances, and in the end, it was one of those people who betrayed me." Irina glanced away for a moment, her voice trembling as she revealed the pain of that memory. Auguste listened, respecting her silence but feeling increasingly at ease to share a bit of his own story. He began to speak about the quiet life he had before the storm, about his late wife, a sweet and strong woman who provided him with the security that now seemed to be lacking. He also spoke about the estrangement from his family over the years, especially after he dedicated himself to raising Lily alone. The death of his wife had left a void that no shelter or friendship seemed able to fill. It seems that when we reach an age like mine," he continued, laughing without humor, "people simply forget about us." Irina nodded, perfectly understanding the sentiment. As they looked at each other, they realized that the shared pain between them went beyond material loss. It was a loneliness they both knew, and for the first time, it felt a little less heavy. On the third day, while Auguste and Irina exchanged life stories in a corner of the room, Lily, who had been more reserved until then, watched Irina with a certain fascination. The woman's natural elegance, even in worn clothes, captivated the girl's curiosity. She approached slowly and sat next to Irina, who noticed Lily's interest with a gentle smile. "Do you like to draw, Lily?" Irina asked, pulling a notebook from her bag. It was a simple object, but it seemed precious to her. Lily looked at the notebook, a new sparkle appearing in her eyes, and nodded shyly. Irina tore out a sheet and handed Lily a pencil, encouraging her with an encouraging look. The girl, initially hesitant, began to sketch timidly, as if afraid of being judged. Irina observed every stroke with patience, encouraging her to continue and showing her simple techniques to improve her drawing. "You know, you have talent," Irina said, genuinely impressed. "It's amazing what you can do." Lily smiled, a smile that Auguste hadn't seen in a long time. Something about Irina seemed capable of reaching the girl in a way that he couldn't, and for the first time, Auguste felt a pang of gratitude towards that woman. It was as if, in that shelter, he considered the last place he would find support. Lily was finally beginning to feel at ease. Irina turned to Auguste and winked, as if to say she was happy to help. Auguste responded with a slight nod, touched by the scene. Amidst that simplicity, he began to see the shelter not as a place of defeat, but as a possible temporary home where he and Lily might perhaps start anew. One late afternoon, while Auguste watched Lily draw with Irina in a corner of the common room, a young man walked by them with heavy steps and a disdainful look. He seemed oblivious to the sadness that permeated the shelter, wearing a hardened expression and a style that mixed carelessness with rebellion. He stopped near Auguste, giving him a quick, piercing glance as if he considered him just another dead weight. "Hey, old man," the kid said with a contemptuous tone, crossing his arms and raising an eyebrow. "You look like one of those grumpy old men who have nowhere else to go, right? I bet you depend on your granddaughter even to cross the street." At first, Auguste felt a wave of anger. He held Lily's arm firmly, who looked at him confused, not understanding the reason for the provocation. He was about to respond in kind, but something in the young man's gaze made him hesitate. Rocco, as he soon learned the boy's name, didn't seem just like a rebellious kid without a cause. There was a deep bitterness in his eyes, something that indicated a life marked by disappointments that may have been recent. "You don't know us, kid," Auguste replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. "And by the looks of it, you don't understand what it's like to need help." Rocco let out a dry laugh and looked at the ceiling as if he were bored. "Help? Is that what you think you need? You think that's what everyone here needs?" he said dismissively. "I'd rather be alone than depend on anyone. Only idiots think others will save them." Auguste fell silent for a moment, absorbing those words. Something in that cold, bitter speech seemed to echo in a distorted way, his own doubts and distrust of a system that always seemed to fail in the end. He looked at Lily, and then at Irina, who was watching the scene from afar, and understood that in some way he needed to find a way to deal with that boy. "Sometimes we only discover the value of help when we've already lost everything," Auguste replied, with a calmness that surprised even Rocco. The young man was left speechless, casting one last defiant look before walking away with the same arrogance, but Auguste sensed that his words had struck a chord in some way. That first exchange, filled with tension and conflict, awakened in Auguste an inexplicable desire to understand that kid better. Days at the shelter began to follow a peculiar rhythm for Auguste, Lily, and Irina. For the first time since they had arrived there, Auguste felt a sense of routine that brought a bit of peace. Every morning he woke up to find Lily by his side, and while the little girl got ready, he sought out a quieter corner where he could sit with Irina. They both cherished those silent moments to enjoy the modest breakfast the shelter offered. After meals, Lily would approach Irina with her notepad, ready to spend hours drawing. Each day, Irina taught her new techniques, and Lily seemed to absorb every detail, her face lighting up with enthusiasm that Auguste hadn't seen since before the tragedy. The girl's eyes sparkled as she discovered ways to bring her drawings to life, and with each scribble, it was as if she was reconstructing a piece of herself. Irina also appeared more at ease beside Lily, and Auguste noticed that this friendship was doing wonders not just for his granddaughter, but for Irina herself, who seemed to find purpose in the girl's eyes. Over time, Auguste began to see himself as a kind of pillar for both of them. He felt responsible for those two souls who, for different reasons, had lost just as much as he had. In their moments together, Auguste enjoyed telling stories from the past, blending real and fictional details to entertain Lily and see Irina's shy smile. One night he began to recount the time he met his wife and how, on one of their trips together, they ended up lost in the streets of Paris. The story unfolded in a comedic tone, and Lily giggled, interrupting him with questions. Irina, on the other hand, simply smiled, seeming grateful for those small, shared moments of happiness. One evening, Auguste noticed the look in Lily's eyes, which seemed to long for something more. The atmosphere of the shelter was repetitive, and people rarely interacted beyond necessity. He knew his granddaughter needed something to keep hope alive. With the idea of brightening the mood, he proposed a small party to liven up the night. "How about a little party?" he asked, trying to disguise his casual tone. "Just something simple to have some fun, what do you think?" Lily's eyes instantly sparkled, and Irina chuckled softly, nodding in agreement. They gathered what little they had, some fruits and cookies donated to the shelter, a piece of cheese that Irina had saved, and a can of juice that Auguste had managed to get. With Irina's help, they improvised a table with a blanket spread on the floor of the dormitory, where they sat in a circle. Lily seemed enchanted. It was as if that small gesture from her friends had transformed the environment. She gazed at the dishes with a huge smile, her eyes capturing every detail of the little party. Auguste looked at Irina and saw the same smile he saw on Lily's face. That simple meal felt monumental to the three of them, and for a moment the shelter became a true home. In the midst of the party, Lily insisted on drawing Auguste and Irina together while they smiled at her, amazed at the girl's talent. When she finished, she handed the drawing to Auguste, who observed it in silence, feeling a mix of pride and emotion. It was a simple drawing, but in it, Lily had captured the faces of her new friends sincerely, as if she knew that here she had found something she never expected, a new family. The little party was in full swing when Auguste noticed Rocco, the young man who had teased him days earlier, sitting in a distant corner of the dormitory, watching the scene with a serious expression. Despite his hard eyes, there was something in them that hinted at curiosity, perhaps even a hint of envy, although he tried to hide it. Auguste considered ignoring him, but as he looked back at the makeshift table, he decided to reach out. He grabbed a piece of cheese and approached Rocco slowly, sensing that there might be more to the boy than the rebellious attitude he displayed. When he got close, he extended his hand, offering the piece of food. Rocco looked at him with a mix of disdain and distrust. "I don't need charity, old man," Rocco muttered, trying to push the gesture away. "And I'm not offering charity," Auguste replied, keeping his tone firm. "I'm just sharing what we have. You can accept it, or you can keep pretending you don't need anyone. But I believe everyone here at some point has needed someone." Rocco hesitated. He glanced sideways at the cheese and then back at Auguste's sincere expression. Hunger spoke louder, and he took the piece, biting into it reluctantly, but without saying anything more. Auguste simply sat down beside him in silence, not pressing him. They remained that way for a while until Rocco sighed. "You think giving me this will change anything?" the boy asked, still wearing a hostile expression. "What difference does it make, huh?" "Maybe it doesn't make any difference to you," Auguste replied calmly. "But for me, it makes all the difference to know that I can count on someone. You don't have to understand me, but if anything I'm saying holds any value, one day you'll remember it." Rocco didn't respond. He just continued eating in silence, as if he were digesting Auguste's words along with the piece of cheese. Auguste observed the boy, and at some point, he felt that Rocco's anger was not just directed at the world, but at himself. He reminded Auguste a bit of his younger self, filled with doubts and trying desperately to prove that he didn't need anyone. As Auguste stood up to return to his little party, he cast one last look at the young man and realized that Rocco was more vulnerable than he wanted to appear. Somewhere beneath that tough exterior, Auguste saw someone who, like everyone else in the shelter, just needed a reason to trust again. As Auguste walked back to the makeshift table where Lily and Irina were waiting for him, he felt that that night had changed something, both for him and for Rocco. The next day, Auguste found himself once again sitting next to Rocco, engaged in a short, hesitant conversation marked by uncomfortable silences. They were in the small common area of the shelter, where the sounds of other conversations and the faint smell of disinfectant created an almost clinical atmosphere. Rocco had a suspicious demeanor, arms crossed, but this time he didn't pull away. Auguste watched the young man and, seeing the tension etched on his face, realized something. That same expression of frustration, anger, and loneliness had been his years ago when everything felt like a vast field of lost battles. The urge to help the boy grew stronger, but he knew he had to tread carefully. For someone like Rocco, any gesture could seem like a threat. "I know you don't like depending on anyone, kid," Auguste said, choosing his words cautiously. "But sometimes we all need help. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for my granddaughter." Rocco glanced sideways, appearing uninterested, but Auguste noticed he was listening. The boy still maintained his tough facade, but his eyes betrayed the loneliness he was trying to hide. When Rocco finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "It's easy to say that when you have someone. I don't have anyone," he said, trying not to look directly at Auguste. "My mom? Well, she's not around anymore." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Auguste felt the weight of them and resisted the urge to probe further. Instead, he simply nodded. "I think you need someone, Rocco, and I've needed someone too. So if you ever want to talk, I'll be here," Auguste said, knowing that anything more might push the boy away. Rocco looked at him with the same hardened expression as always, but he didn't reject the offer. In that moment, Auguste knew he had planted the first seed of trust. A few days later, on a morning when the timid sun lit up the shelter's courtyard, Rocco finally approached Auguste more spontaneously. He was clearly reluctant, with tense shoulders and clenched fists, but something in his expression indicated he needed to speak. They were near the entrance of the shelter, where Auguste was busy fixing one of the old chairs. He raised his eyes to see Rocco coming closer, but said nothing, waiting for the young man to speak first. "You asked the other day about me not having anyone," Rocco said, looking down at the ground. "My mom and I got evicted, you know? We were living in a hotel, until they kicked us out too." Rocco paused, and Auguste noticed the effort the boy was making to hold back tears. It was as if he was suffocating in his pain, trying to hold it together with all his strength. "I tried to find a place, but she vanished. Just left, I guess. Maybe she thought I could manage on my own, huh? I don't need her." Rocco's tone sounded like a desperate attempt to convince himself. Auguste felt the boy's anguish and realized he wasn't just angry. He was hurt. In that moment, Auguste knew he should offer Rocco something he had needed in many moments of his own life: a little understanding. "Look, Rocco," Auguste said with a calmness that only experience can bring. "Maybe your mom is dealing with things you can't even imagine. I don't know what happened, but I can tell you this. I'm here. And while she's not around, you'll have someone to help you." The young man remained quiet, processing August's words. He didn't say anything, but the look he cast at the elderly man was filled with something he had been trying to hide for a long time: gratitude. The brief exchange of words was observed by Irina, who had approached silently, and by the other residents of the shelter. For the first time, Auguste felt that somehow they were forming a small support network that could genuinely make a difference in the boy's life. That same week, moved by Rocco's situation, Auguste and Irina decided to take concrete action. The shelter was dreary and oppressive, with cold walls and windows that rarely let sunlight in. As they talked, they both realized that making the place a bit more welcoming could benefit not only Rocco, but everyone who depended on it to survive. Auguste gathered the residents one cold night and explained the idea, proposing that each person contribute something to make the place more livable. There were people with manual skills, others who knew how to organize spaces, and even Irina, who offered to find small decorative items at nearby thrift stores. The project took shape with everyone's help. Auguste and Rocco were tasked with painting a wall in the dining room, and as they worked together, Auguste noticed the boy slowly opening up. The moments of silence became less tense, and Rocco even allowed himself to smile occasionally, even if it was a brief and subtle smile. Gradually, others began to approach as well, offering their help and support. Lily and Irina, on the other hand, set up a small makeshift library with donated books, organizing them on a shelf that had previously been empty. Watching the shelter transform into a more pleasant communal space seemed to brighten the faces of the people, and Auguste himself felt a new and unexpected sensation. He wasn't just living in a shelter, he was helping to build something of value. Over time, Auguste and Irina's initiative began to make a difference. Other residents, who had hardly spoken to each other before, started to interact and help one another, creating an atmosphere of mutual respect and support. Auguste looked around and saw in each person's eyes a spark of hope. The shelter, which had once been a place of defeat and resignation, now felt like a new chance, for him, for Rocco, and for everyone else. That invisible bond of support united them in a unique way, and Auguste felt grateful to be part of something so important. And as he looked at Rocco, he knew this was just the beginning. As the improvements to the shelter took shape, Auguste began to trust Rocco more, the young man who just days before had avoided any contact and rejected help. Now, working side by side, Auguste and Rocco found a silent harmony that strengthened the bond between them. With paint and brushes, they adjusted details on the walls of the shelter, trying to bring color and life to an environment once marked by shadows and resignation. "Hey, kid," Auguste called, handing him a brush. "Take this one and see if you can finish that part of the hallway." Rocco took the brush without hesitation, and instead of responding with his usual sarcasm, he gave a slight nod, almost respectful. As they painted, they exchanged a few words, and Auguste, noticing that Rocco was more open, ventured to offer some advice. "I used to be rebellious too, you know," Auguste said with a subtle smile. "When I was young, I thought everyone was against me. It was only after a long time that I learned that sometimes we need people as much as they need us." Rocco rolled his eyes slightly, but Auguste noticed the hint of a smile concealed beneath. There was something new in the boy, a silent acceptance that was slowly emerging. "If you say so," Rocco murmured, but his tone was lighter than before. "We'll see how far this trust goes." With each conversation and shared task, Auguste felt that the boy was offering him in small doses his own trust. Rocco still kept his protective shield, but Auguste knew that little by little he was penetrating that armor. And for him, every bit of progress was a small triumph. One day, while adjusting some shelves for the shelter's makeshift library, Rocco suddenly fell silent. He had a distant look, as if something weighed heavily on his mind. Auguste noticed and remained silent, waiting for the boy to feel comfortable enough to speak. "You know, Auguste," Rocco began hesitantly, "I grew up only with my mom. I never knew who my dad was." The declaration hung in the air, and Auguste felt the weight of that secret kept for so long. Rocco's gaze, once full of sarcasm and indifference, was now vulnerable and painful, as if in that moment he was admitting to a wound he had always tried to hide. "I always wanted to know who he was, you know," Rocco continued, his voice heavy with sadness. "But my mom, she never wanted to talk about him. It was like it was a forbidden secret, something she kept locked away." Auguste felt a tightness in his chest. He knew what it was like to live with unanswered questions, and at that moment his own pain from having lost contact with his distant daughter seemed to align with Rocco's emptiness. "Rocco," Auguste started, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "If you want, I can help you find that answer. I won't promise it will be easy, but you don't have to do it alone." Rocco looked at him with a mix of gratitude and apprehension. He wasn't used to having someone by his side in moments like this, but there, seeing the sincerity in Auguste's eyes, he realized he finally had someone to trust. I appreciate it," Rocco murmured, looking away, "but I don't know if I'm ready." "You don't have to be," Auguste replied. "When you are, I'll be here." With a heavy heart, Auguste reflected on the boy's words, feeling an increasing responsibility for him. It was as if a part of his own story was intertwined with that of the boy, and he found himself determined to help him find answers to the questions that tormented him. The following days were marked by a growing curiosity in Auguste. As they talked about Rocco's struggles, details about the boy's mother emerged in their stories, and Auguste began to connect some dots. Small coincidences that had seemed insignificant until then now echoed in his mind like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't ignore. One night, after a long conversation about Rocco's childhood, Auguste returned to the dormitory feeling an uncontrollable restlessness. The boy's words resonated in his mind. His mother had disappeared after they were evicted, something Auguste knew was painful. And in the few details the boy mentioned, he described traits and memories of his mother that seemed strangely familiar to Auguste. He didn't know why, but his mind insisted on recalling Alice, his own lost daughter. That night, sitting beside Irina, Auguste opened up. "Irina," he began hesitantly, "I'm starting to think that maybe Rocco is closer to me than I imagined." Irina looked at him with a surprised but attentive expression. She knew Auguste's history with Alice, the daughter he had lost contact with many years ago, a pain he always carried. "Do you think he could be your grandson?" she asked, her gaze filled with understanding. Auguste sighed, still reluctant to believe what his intuition was telling him, but feeling that it was more than mere coincidence. "I'm not sure, but there are so many things he says that remind me of her. And if it's true, Irina, if Rocco really is my grandson and he doesn't know it?" Irina took Auguste's hand as a form of silent support. "Auguste, whatever happens, he needs you now. You're already an important figure in his life. But if this does turn out to be true, well, it's something you will both have to face together." With those words, Auguste felt a mix of fear and hope. The idea that Rocco could be his grandson filled him with intense emotion, something between joy and apprehension. And as he looked toward the dormitory where the boy slept, he knew that in any case, his role in his life was already significant. Now he just needed to confirm what his heart insisted on saying, even if the path ahead was more challenging than he had imagined.
If you're enjoying the story and want to follow it to the end, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. It's so important for the channel's growth and for us to continue this journey together. Now, let's get back to the story and find out what awaits Auguste and Rocco.
Auguste's distrust of Rocco and Alice consumed him daily. He found himself watching the boy, searching for details that could confirm his suspicions. But the mystery seemed to hide in the smallest gestures, in quick glances, and in the few words they exchanged. Whenever Rocco mentioned a memory, Auguste listened intently, trying to catch something that would align with his memories of Alice, his distant daughter. Every detail he uncovered seemed to pull him back to the years he had lost contact with her. One day, determined to understand what fate had placed before him, Auguste sought out Irina. He knew she could help him organize his thoughts and remember details that might be crucial. They sat together in a secluded corner of the shelter, and Auguste spoke about Alice. He recounted how she had drifted away years ago, how their relationship had deteriorated after his wife's death, and how he still blamed himself for not being able to keep her close. "If Alice is indeed Rocco's mother, that means all this time, Irina," Auguste whispered, his voice choked. "All this time, my own grandson has been right here beside me, and I didn't even notice." Irina listened in silence, not interrupting, absorbing every word. She knew that this moment was painful for Auguste, and the expression on his face revealed a mix of concern and empathy. She helped him recall small details about Alice, trying to piece together the fragments that seemed to slowly fit into place. "Auguste, if you feel this strongly, then maybe it's true," Irina said, placing her hand on his shoulder. "But you need to be sure before anything else. And you need to know how to tell Rocco. He might not be ready to hear something like this all of a sudden." Auguste nodded, feeling the weight of that conversation. He knew that to reveal the truth to the boy, he needed more than mere deductions. He needed the certainty that his heart was already providing, but his mind kept insisting on questioning. The next day, Auguste was determined to seek information that would confirm what his heart already knew. After speaking with Rocco again, he managed to gather additional details about the boy's mother, and each time Rocco spoke of her, Auguste's heart raced. The memories he thought he had lost long ago began to resurface, and he realized how those pieces of information aligned with what he remembered of Alice. Irina, ever ready to support him, decided to help him officially confirm his suspicions. With the aid of local records and some contacts she had maintained since her time as an executive, she was able to gather information about Alice's past, including her son's name and the address of a rented room where Alice had lived with Rocco before disappearing. It was as if all the pieces, once confusing and scattered, suddenly fell into place, forming a painfully clear image. "She is your daughter, Auguste," Irina said, looking him directly in the eyes. "Alice is Rocco's mother." The confirmation hit him like an avalanche, a mix of inexplicable joy and pain. All the weight of the years apart, the doubts, the fears, seemed to surge all at once. Alice, the daughter he had thought he lost forever, had left behind her own child, the grandson he had never imagined he would meet. At the same time, the uncertainty about how Rocco would react left him tense. "I need to tell him," Auguste said, his voice trembling. "He deserves to know. And maybe he can finally understand what it means to have a family." Irina held Auguste's hand, conveying a calm that he desperately sought. He knew that the revelation would be a turning point in Rocco's life, and at that moment, Auguste prepared to make one of the most important and difficult revelations of his life. That night, when the shelter was quieter and most people were already asleep, Auguste called Rocco for a private conversation. They sat in one of the less crowded corridors, and Auguste took a deep breath, trying to find the right words for a truth he never imagined he would need to reveal. "Rocco, do you trust me?" Auguste asked, his voice low but firm. The boy looked at him with a mix of distrust and curiosity. Up until that moment, Rocco had begun to see Auguste as a figure he could rely on, but he didn't understand the seriousness of that question. "I think so, old man. Auguste," he replied, trying to sound casual, although his nervousness was evident. Auguste took a deep breath and began, carefully choosing his words. "Rocco, what I'm about to tell you is something I never imagined. I recently discovered that your mother, Alice, she is my daughter. This means I am your grandfather." The silence that followed that statement was almost palpable, like a heavy wave hanging between them. Rocco stared at him, frozen, unsure of how to react. Disbelief was clear in his eyes, and he seemed to be struggling against the impulse to reject the truth. "This can't be," murmured Rocco, shaking his head. "My mom never told me anything about a grandfather, about you." Auguste felt his heart tighten, but he maintained his calm. "I know, Rocco. I know it's hard to understand, and I didn't know until recently either, but I'm here. I'm here because even without knowing, we were meant to find each other again. You are part of my family, and I want you to know that to me, that means everything." Rocco remained silent, processing the information. Pain and confusion mingled on his face, and he closed his eyes as if trying to push away the impact of that revelation. Auguste reached out, gently touching his shoulder, trying to convey some of the support he knew the boy needed. "I never thought I had a real family," Rocco finally said, his voice hoarse. "It was always just me and my mom, and then she left. I thought I was alone." "You were never alone, Rocco," Auguste replied, emotion overflowing. "I am here, and I will be here for you. No matter what happens, you now know you have someone. You have me." The boy took a deep breath, and for the first time, Auguste saw Rocco's barriers begin to crumble. He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes, finally accepting what had been revealed to him. The disbelief and shock began to dissipate, giving way to a reluctant but genuine acceptance. Auguste realized that despite the difficulty of the situation, the truth was starting to transform both their lives in ways he had never imagined. And as silence enveloped the shelter, Auguste knew that in that moment, fate had given them the opportunity to start anew. It was a gray and damp morning at the shelter when an unexpected figure appeared at the entrance, freezing Auguste in place. Alice, his long-lost daughter, stood just a few meters away, her eyes tense and weary yet intense. She seemed hesitant, as if still deciding whether to stay or turn back. Auguste felt a tightness in his chest. The reunion he had never truly believed would happen was right before him, bringing a whirlwind of emotions he could hardly process. Alice took a step forward, nervously clutching the strap of her bag. She looked older than Auguste remembered, but she was still the same daughter he loved, even though the choices and years of separation had left marks on their faces and hearts. With a short breath, Auguste took a step forward too, each movement laden with tension. Rocco, watching closely, held his breath. Until that moment, he had never imagined what it would be like to find his mother this way, in an environment so different from what they both knew. His expression was a mix of curiosity, surprise, and hope. For the first time, he saw Alice and Auguste together, and he could feel that this moment would be pivotal for all of them. "Dad," Alice began hesitantly, as if that word had been forgotten in her mouth for far too long. Auguste nearly lost his breath upon hearing her voice. There was so much to say, so much to understand. But in that instant, he simply nodded, letting her know that he was there, that he had been waiting for her for so long. "Alice," he replied, and her name sounded like a lament. "I waited so long, so long." His daughter looked away for a moment, and the tension between them was almost palpable. They both knew that this encounter would not be easy, but at that moment they were there, ready to face the wounds of the past. Auguste and Alice sat in a corner of the shelter, separated from the others. Rocco watched from a distance, lacking the courage to approach, absorbing everything with attentive eyes, as if he were trying to understand the layers of the relationship between them. Auguste, still shaken, tried to find words to begin what he knew would be a difficult conversation. "Alice, I'm so sorry for everything," he started, his voice choked with emotion. "I know that when your mother left, I made many mistakes. I was selfish, and that drove us apart. I just wanted to protect you, but in the end, I lost you." Alice sighed deeply, struggling to maintain her composure. He knew she carried years of hurt, but in that moment, she let her barriers fall, allowing the tears she had held back to flow down her cheeks. "I'm sorry too, Dad," she replied, her voice trembling. "But I didn't know how to come back. I was broken. and I thought you would blame me for what happened. I didn't want to be a burden to you." Her words pierced deep into August's heart, who, for the first time, realized that they had both suffered for their own reasons. In a silent gesture, he took Alice's hand, and she, though hesitant, accepted the touch, allowing the contact to dissipate some of the accumulated pain. They both cried, letting their tears express what words could not. "I just want to have you back," Auguste murmured, his eyes fixed on hers, "and to do for Rocco what I couldn't do for you." Alice nodded, wiping her tears and glancing toward her son, who still watched from a distance. She turned back to Auguste with a look of gratitude he hadn't seen in years. "I know. And despite everything, I'm ready to forgive, Dad," she said, offering him a timid but sincere smile. The weight of the past began to lift, and they both felt that this painful moment was bringing them together in a new and profound way. With the reunion and forgiveness between them, Auguste felt he had finally found the peace he had long sought, but he knew that the shelter, with its cold walls and tight confines, wasn't the right place to start a new life as a family. He thought of all the possibilities, and an idea, still uncertain, began to form in his mind. He called Alice and Rocco to join him and Irina. The four of them sat in a secluded corner, and Auguste looked at them with a sparkle in his eyes, a glimmer of hope he barely recognized in himself. I was thinking, what if we moved into a house? A simple place, but just ours, where we could start over away from here, Auguste suggested, choosing his words carefully. "I know money is tight, but with Irina's help and what little we have, we could rent a place, maybe on the outskirts, but it would be a home." Alice's eyes widened in surprise, and a new emotion surfaced on her face. Rocco, still processing the idea of having a real family, looked from Auguste to Alice, as if trying to understand what this would mean for him. "Would you really do that for us, Dad?" Alice asked, her voice low, filled with a mix of doubt and hope. "For you, I would do anything, Alice. Anything." Auguste's response was firm, and he met Alice's and Rocco's gazes with a look full of determination. "It doesn't matter where, but I want you to know that you have a place, a family, and I want to be the grandfather you deserve, Rocco." Rocco looked away, but for the first time, Auguste noticed the boy was almost holding back a laugh, as if he were reluctant to admit that the idea excited him. After a moment, he nodded, still hesitant but clearly touched by the proposal. "I think that would be cool," Rocco said in an almost defiant tone, but a shy smile began to appear on his face. Alice smiled, and Irina, always there to support, placed a hand on Auguste's shoulder. She looked at him and the others with an air of approval, satisfied to see that something good was finally materializing from the journey they had all taken together. "So that's it," said Auguste with a sigh of relief. "A new life together." The moment was simple, but for everyone there, it carried a profound significance. Rocco, for the first time, felt that he had a place to belong. Alice, after so many years, was reconnecting with the father she believed she had lost. And Auguste, with a renewed heart, felt grateful for the chance to start over beside the people he loved. As they planned their next steps, hope illuminated the face of each one. The move to the new house was simple and unceremonious, yet each of them felt as if they were stepping into a palace. The small, worn-down house on the outskirts of New York had faded walls and a garden overrun with weeds, but for Auguste, Alice, Rocco, and Lily, it represented a chance to start anew. As they unloaded the few belongings they had brought, a sense of purpose began to blossom in each of them. Lily, with her childlike curiosity, was the first to explore their new home, wandering through the hallways and opening doors as if each corner hid a treasure. She stopped in the kitchen, where an old wooden table sat in the center of the room, marked with scratches and scars from lives that had passed through. "Grandpa, are we going to eat here every day?" Lily asked, her eyes sparkling with the excitement of the new. Auguste smiled, running his hand through his granddaughter's hair. "Yes, dear, this is where we'll eat together every day. he replied, feeling warmth of happiness spread through his chest. Rocco, watching the scene closely, began to unload their few belongings by the door. He looked at the house as someone still struggling to accept that this was real. Alice approached him, and together they walked to the backyard where an old tool shed was nearly hidden by the overgrown vegetation. "It's a bit rustic," Rocco commented, glancing around with a slightly intrigued expression. Alice laughed and draped her arm over his shoulders. "More than rustic, Rocco. It's ours. I think we'll make this place amazing over time." Slowly, a light atmosphere began to fill the rooms. As the day wore on, everyone got involved in small tasks to transform the house into a home, something that increasingly resembled a new chance. That same evening, after a long day of work, the family gathered in the makeshift living room. Auguste had managed to find an old radio, which now played soft music, bringing a sense of tranquility. He settled into a worn armchair while Lily played on the floor with one of the drawings she had made during the day, and Alice prepared tea in the kitchen. Rocco, reclining on the sofa, watched everyone with a look that mixed exhaustion and peace. Auguste sat in silence, observing the faces of each person there. A year earlier, he could never have imagined finding himself in this situation, seated in a modest home next to a family he had rediscovered purely by chance. The simple idea of having his daughter, granddaughter, and grandson nearby felt more like a dream than reality. He felt a strong emotion swell in his chest, and his eyes began to mist as he watched Rocco and Lily laughing together. It was the first time he had seen Rocco so at ease, laughing without trying to hide his happiness. Lily snuggled next to her cousin, enchanted by the stories he was inventing about the city. Alice returned with a tray of tea and, noticing Auguste's emotional expression, smiled as she sat next to him. "Dad," she said softly, handing him a cup. "Thank you. Without you, we wouldn't be here together building this." Auguste smiled and held her hand. It was a mutual gratitude that stemmed from the efforts and struggles they had faced to be reunited there. He felt that, despite the adversities and losses, he had finally found what truly mattered. And in that small room, with the sound of the radio and the warmth of his loved one's company, he realized he had achieved a peace long forgotten. In the following days, curious neighbors began to approach Auguste and his family to welcome them to the neighborhood. At first, they exchanged only brief greetings and friendly waves on their way to work. But upon hearing about the struggles they had faced to get there, the neighbors decided to come together and offer a little help. One Saturday morning, the doorbell rang, and Auguste opened the door to find an elderly woman named Mrs. Williams holding a bag of groceries. "Mr. Auguste, I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood," she said with a warm smile. "I thought some items might help." Soon after, other neighbors arrived. Mr. Carmine, who brought some tools to assist with the renovations. Maria, a young woman with gardening skills who offered to revitalize the yard. And even a child from the neighborhood brought a stack of books for Lily. The house filled with voices and laughter as the neighbors spread throughout the rooms, helping in any way they could. Auguste, overwhelmed by their kindness, felt his heart swell with warmth from the solidarity of that community. He watched Rocco working alongside Mr. Carmine, learning to use some tools with a smile that had once been rare, and Alice helping Maria replant flowers in the garden. Lily ran between the adults, enchanted by the bustle and the presence of so many people. Seeing his granddaughter's joy, Auguste felt complete in a way he had never experienced before. He realized that this house, once just an empty, worn structure, was transforming into something much greater, a true home. As the sun set and the neighbors began to say their goodbyes, Auguste stood at the entrance of the house, watching each of them leave with a wave of gratitude. The community had become a part of his life, and he saw in them not just neighbors, but friends who had come together to offer support and build a new chapter alongside his family. He looked up at the sky, his heart full of gratitude, and knew, with the certainty that only experience brings, that everything he had lost had been unexpectedly rewarded in a way he could never have imagined. Night had fallen, and the small house in the outskirts of New York was filled with a warmth that went beyond the freshly painted walls or the simple furniture that adorned the space. In the kitchen, Alice was preparing dinner with Lily's help, while Rocco and Auguste set the table, placing plates and cutlery for everyone. The atmosphere was pure joy, as if they had all left behind the difficulties of the past. When the food was ready, they all sat around the table. There were laughs, small conversations, and glances of complicity that conveyed the love built between them. Auguste watched everything, feeling a mix of emotion and fulfillment. He had never imagined that a simple family dinner could be so significant. What once seemed distant and unreachable was right there in front of him, and in each face around the table he saw a part of his own story and redemption. Irina, who had been regularly visiting them since their move, was there too, sitting next to Alice and exchanging smiles with Lily. She felt a natural part of that family, like a dear friend who had always been by their side. Auguste looked at her with gratitude, remembering all the difficult moments in the shelter and how her presence had been crucial for him to endure the hardships. "I think we're ready for a toast," Auguste said, raising his glass, "to this new beginning and to everyone who made this possible." Everyone raised their glasses, exchanging emotional looks and toasting to the fresh start that once seemed like just a dream. For Auguste, that dinner represented more than just a meal. It was a symbol of unity, reconciliation, and a future he never imagined he would have. When dinner ended and the conversations began to dwindle, Auguste did something unexpected. He stood up and grabbed a small wooden box that had been tucked away in the corner of the room since their move. Everyone looked on curiously, unsure of what he was planning. Auguste opened the box and took out 4 envelopes, each with one of their names on it. "I wrote something for each of you," he explained, handing an envelope to Alice, another to Rocco, one to Lily, and the last to Irina. "They're just a few words, but I hope they convey what each of you means to me." Alice looked at the envelope with an emotional smile, and Rocco, who rarely showed his emotions, held his carefully, never taking his eyes off his grandfather. Lily, always curious, opened her envelope quickly, while Irina watched Auguste with a mix of surprise and tenderness. Each letter was simple yet heartfelt, and as they opened them, all were overwhelmed by a wave of emotion. "Alice, my dear daughter, thank you for giving me a second chance to be your father. You are strong, brave, and the pride I feel for you is immense. Nothing makes me happier than seeing you here by my side and knowing we have a new chance to build a life together. I will always be here for you. Rocco, my grandson, you have taught me more about resilience and courage than I could ever imagine. I know life has been tough for you, but I want you to know that now you have a family forever. I promise to be the grandfather you deserve and to help you find your way. Remember, no matter what happens, you are never alone again. Lily, my little one, you are the light of our home, and your smile gives me the strength to carry on. Thank you for being the most special granddaughter and for filling our days with joy. I will protect and love you always, and I hope you never lose that light that brightens us all. Irina, my friend, I don't know how I would have faced everything without you by my side. Your friendship has been an unexpected gift, and I know it has changed my life forever. Thank you for being here, for being our friend, and for being part of our family. Each person held their letter, deeply touched by Auguste's words. He had transformed the silence in their hearts into pure gratitude, and as he looked at each face, he saw that they all understood how he felt. It was a profound emotion, an unbreakable bond that united them. With everyone still absorbing the intensity of the letters, Auguste took a brief pause, as if he were about to share something more important, something he had been contemplating for some time. He took a deep breath, gathering courage, and spoke. I have been thinking a lot about this house and what it means to all of us. When I found myself homeless, I thought I had lost everything, but I realized I gained something much greater. I gained you all, and I gained a new chance. Because of that, I would like to transform this house into something more." He paused, observing the surprised expressions on everyone's faces. "I want this house to be a support point for other families who have gone through what we have, that we can welcome people who, like us, need a new opportunity. We can show that starting over is possible, that there is hope even when everything seems lost." Alice, emotional, placed her hand over Auguste's, wiping away a tear. "Dad, this is incredible. I've thought about this too, about how we could give back to all those who helped us. I think this is a beautiful way to do it." Irina, visibly moved, smiled and nodded. "I want to be part of this too, Auguste. I believe we can make a difference for many people. I know I don't have the same power as before, but I can still help make this house more than just a home. We can turn it into a true shelter." Rocco watched everything, trying to absorb the magnitude of what his grandfather was proposing. He nodded, feeling connected to the family's purpose. "And I will help too," he said with a shy smile. "It might sound silly, but I think I know what it's like to want to start over, so yeah, I'm in." With everyone on board, Auguste felt enveloped by indescribable joy. He looked around and saw that around that table were people he loved and with whom he could now build a legacy. The small house on the outskirts would no longer just be a refuge, but would become a symbol of renewal and hope, not just for them, but for many who would find their first step toward a new life there. As they toasted to their new mission and what the future would bring, Auguste felt that, in losing everything, he had found what truly mattered.
This story reminds us that even in the hardest moments, we can find strength and support in the most unexpected places. Auguste, Lily, Rocco, and Alice's journey shows how past scars can be healed through love, forgiveness, and the courage to start over. In the end, they built not only a home, but also a legacy of hope, proving that pain can be transformed into something precious. Did Auguste, by losing everything, actually find what he needed most? And for you, what does this story represent? Share in the comments what touched you the most. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, leave a like, and tell us what you thought. It helps us so much to keep bringing stories like this one. And don't forget to click on the end screen card to watch the next recommended video. Thank you for watching and see you next time.